Okay, so welcome back to another version of Leadership Trait Test.
Talking straight about leadership traits.
And on today's, our interviewee today is,
We're so honored.
yes, Steve Dye. Steve Dye is with the City of Grand Prairie. He's currently the Deputy City Manager and Chief Operating Officer.
Retired chief.
Yeah, retired chief of police for City of Grand Prairie. And I know he had 35 years of police service, just ended in Grand Prairie. Now he's in the city management piece. And we thought it would be a really good opportunity. You know, there's a lot going on in the world right now.
Right.
And I've met and talked with Steve a number of times, and I just really like his approach. I know he's known as a leader in the community, a leader amongst police chiefs. And I just really want to pick your brain, Steve, if you're okay with it, on, you know, how do we manage this, you know, and kind of hear your perspective on it. I think it's really important.
Welcome, Steve.
Well, thank you, Curtis and Mike, for having me on. I always love talking about leadership, and I appreciate what you guys are doing, and looking forward to the conversation this evening.
Good. We're glad to have you. So kind of tell us about your background real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. I started my police career in 1984 at the Houston Police Department. Worked for 35 years in a number of positions: patrol, SWAT, narcotics. I was a motorcycle officer, and I didn't start promoting until 20 years into my career. Never planned on being a chief, never aspired to be a chief. I would have been happy being a street cop my entire career, but the Lord had other plans for me to serve in a different capacity. I also loved being a chief. But I think, guys, I think sometimes that gave me a better perspective as a leader at the top level of the police department, having done that work on the shop floor for about 20 years. Maybe that gave me a very useful perspective in my decision making and leading, because I understood and do understand what those officers go through on a daily basis.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah, it seems the best leaders are the ones that have worked the front lines.
Trial by fire.
Yeah, and have been there.
And I'm sure you've seen a lot, Steve. I bet we could go on for days talking about all the things you've seen. But, you know, right now, you know, there's a lot of tension, a lot of stuff going on in the streets, a lot of disruption, unhappiness, and that kind of thing. And so I really wanted to get as a former police official, give us your thoughts on, you know, how could this be done better? How would you, or how do you, I know you're still engaged in it, deal with this kind of thing from a community perspective and a police officer?
Well, I think the first thing that people need to realize is police departments are not all created equally. You know, the disadvantage we have, guys, is we all dress similarly. And here's what I mean. If you go to a restaurant tonight and have bad food or bad service, a week from now, when you go to another restaurant, you're not going to equate that previous bad experience with the new experience, because they're two different restaurants, right?
You separate in your mind.
When we have an incident in policing across the country, because we all dress similarly, people immediately stereotype that we have the same training, standards, hiring practices, level of accountability, and culture. And that's just not true. You know, the other thing that we need to keep in mind, we have almost 1 million police officers across this country, which results in billions of contacts with our citizens every year. Right. We have very few failures, but when we do have a failure, and we do have them, they're all nationally televised. And then hypocritically, we tend to be stereotyped from some of the very groups that wish for us not to stereotype them. So I think it all starts with building relationships in the community. And I really want to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that'd be great. I know,
love to hear that.
Having some familiarity with what you've done in Grand Prairie, I know you have a lot of community reach out and that kind of thing. Can you tell us some of that?
Yeah. So hey guys, I worked most of my 20-year career on the streets in minority communities. And I can tell you firsthand, the folks in those communities didn't care what color I was, and I didn't care what color they were. I was trying to help them with quality of life, and they appreciated it. We respected our different cultures and celebrated those, but we didn't use them to divide us. I wanted them to have the same quality of life of any neighborhood of any affluent or socioeconomic level. And I can tell you firsthand, there's just as many good people in a poor neighborhood as there is a rich neighborhood. And so I learned at an early age that, you know, when you're serving as a police officer, we look at everybody as a human being, whether we're having to use force against them or we're just having a nice community policing encounter. We're all created equal in the eyes of God, and we need to remember that. Everybody deserves the same opportunities, the same level of respect. You know, I always tell my officers, if we have to use force, make it very quick, and then let's get right back to treating that person with dignity and respect, even if they've made bad choices. So I think it all starts with building relationships. I always said relationships lead to trust, and trust leads to tolerance. So, you know, fast forward, I'm the chief of police in Grand Prairie, and I have a very diverse city, but we're not having the riots or protests by the grace of God that other cities are seeing. And I'll tell you why, in my opinion. We really have a culture of treating everybody with that same level of dignity and respect. We're not perfect, but we want to build equity every interaction, every day. And so when we do have a potentially controversial situation, they know us as people. They know where our hearts lie, and that's through the everyday conversations and contacts with our community. You know, I tell folks that traffic stop matters, because when you stop somebody on a traffic stop, they may not encounter another Grand Prairie police officer for 8 or 10 years.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're all going to be largely based on your one contact with them. So let's take advantage of that opportunity. Let's treat people as we would want to be treated, and as we would want our family members to be treated.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's so critical, Steve. Talking about leaders, it really all starts with relationships. And
Yeah.
I think you hit it. It's the relationship is built through the conversation and through the contact, right? Through those touch points.
Yeah, and I think what happens, Curtis, is over time in policing, we see so much negativity, so many traumatic events. People generally call us when they're in a moment of crisis or having a problem.
Right.
So it's very easy for officers to become cynical. So we spend an equal amount of time on health and resiliency, you know, in terms of physical fitness, emotional fitness, spiritual fitness, and even financial fitness, you know, teaching our officers how to manage their finances. We want to try to make sure that they're involved in self-care and that they take care of themselves holistically, so that they can best serve the public. If they're tired, if they're having problems at home with their marriage, if they can't pay their bills, if they're not connected spiritually to some set of good values, then it's going to show in their level of service. And it's my job as chief, and now Chief Cesney's job as a leader, to make sure that we maintain that good culture and that healthy environment where these officers are whole and healthy, but also very important that they feel supported and appreciated. You know, if they did the job the best they could the right way, then we need to stand behind them so they can go out every day and know, hey, if I go out here and do the right thing for the right reasons, even if something occurs, I know that my department and my city is going to stand behind me if I made the right choice based on our organizational values.
Yeah. So I think that's so interesting, because we talk a lot about just leaders in general need to really have mindfulness, being able to center, being able to get themselves, you know, off of the emotional roller coaster. Well, I can't imagine the morale of a police officer when you're, you know, seeing things on television and you're hearing about the stuff that's going on. That's got to be just draining, because like you said, you put the uniform on, right? So you're a representation of what some of this ire is about.
Right.
And so, you know, focusing on that morale is so important. And I also like what you said about, you know, they have to know you before the escalated incident. So the more you can get that relationship built, those touch points, that's so key for the community.
Well, you guys, you're touching on some great points. Let me tell you, morale was the most important part of my job, in my opinion. Morale equals productivity. It equals service to the citizens. And how I treat my officers is how they're going to treat the public. So, you know, I always tell younger chiefs that were coming up, I said, hey, the one thing that I want you to bring in every day to be a great leader that costs you nothing is enthusiasm. You're going to step out of your Tahoe, and you may be tired from an 80-hour week, and and you may not feel like talking to anybody, but when you encounter an employee, that may be the only time you see them for 3 or 4 months. Bring enthusiasm, bring energy, bring passion, care about them, know what's going on in their lives the best you can, ask them how they're doing. That's going to translate into the level of service that they give our citizens.
Wow. That was
That's-
a great first part.
I'm telling you that there's just so much information he covered, and it's there's so many times that as leaders when we're doing ours, we're talking the same stuff he was talking
Right,
about as
right.
a police chief
Yes.
or as a community leader, and
Right.
you
So
got into leading
applicable.
your families and all kinds of stuff.
Right.
So it's really
Yeah.
good.
So
We
stay
hope you enjoyed
tuned.
it. Yeah.
Right. More additions.
We're going to
Stay
have a
tuned.
second part coming. Just remember Leadership Trait Talk. You can find us on YouTube, or you can find us via your podcast platform. Subscribe and give us feedback, please.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks, everybody.